it looks like Kroger, at least for these 3 years, is a little bit less profitable. They get to keep only about $2.50 per $100 sales. This is the purpose of common size financial statements. If you look at it, the annual sales of uh, Kroger is about $147 billion. On the other hand, Walmart is $680 billion. It's much bigger. So if you only looked at dollar profit numbers and say, "Oh, Walmart is doing so great," not necessarily. Per dollar of sales, how are they doing? That is the main purpose of common size financial statements. Now, let's think about solvency measures. These are also in three groups. One is short-term leverage ratios or solvency. Long-term solvency, and so-called coverage ratios. Short-term solvency ratios basically asks the question, what is the firm's ability to meet its short-term obligations by using the so-called liquid assets they have? We're going to define what liquidity is. Long-term solvency ratios basically say to what extent the firm is financed with debt, things like debt equity ratio, for example. And coverage ratios ask a different question. To what extent firm is able to get enough income to meet the cost of servicing debt, which is the interest. Let's start with short-term leverage ratios. The most famous one of them is called the current ratio, which is current assets divided by current liabilities. And the interested audience in this is short-term creditors, short-term loans from banks. A lot of firms buy from their suppliers on credit, the so-called trade credit. And as a creditor to this firm who expects to be paid within 3 to 6 months, I'm interested in that number. Do they have enough liquid assets to be able to pay me back? And ideally, you want this number to be significantly greater than 1. In fact, back in 1950s, 60s, people wanted that number to be greater than 2. This ratio doesn't mean that much anymore, especially for large firms. If you're looking at a small business, I'm going to look at that number. But if I'm thinking about Walmart, who cares? Why? If Walmart needs cash to meet its financial obligations, do you really think that they're going to have any problem getting that cash? All they have to do is go to their bank and say, "Give me a loan." In fact, in many cases, they actually have lines of credit. It's like your credit card. You apply for a credit card, and based on your credit history, they decide, okay, I give you $5,000 limit. That means if and when you need it, you can borrow up to that amount, but you don't have to. Similarly, firms have lines of credit. If they need it, they can go there. It's not how much cash or liquid assets you have, how much access to liquidity you have. That's important. One of the biggest examples is Dell. I mean, I've done that in the previous section. I'm not going to do it for you guys. Dell's current ratio is about 0.75. If I saw that number as a financial analyst in early 70s, I wouldn't have touched Dell at all. I would have figured, oh, they're in financial distress. Nope. In fact, Dell thrives on that. The way Dell's business model works, you decide to buy a Dell computer, either on Amazon or somewhere else. You enter your order. As soon as that order is entered, Dell's system immediately generates orders to their suppliers for each of the parts. They're shipped in, they assemble it together, they ship it to you, they get their money from you pretty quickly. Even with credit cards, I mean, the difference between when you're charged versus when Dell actually gets money is not more than 5 days. But they pay their suppliers typically within 30 to 90 days. So they actually use the supplier to finance their operations. That ratio used to be even smaller. Probably these days, suppliers say you're taking too much advantage of us. Maybe they reduce the length of those loans, but that's the important part. Now, we're going to think about liquidity. What do you understand when I say that an asset is a liquid asset? Hmm? I mean, cash is liquid, obviously, you have it. But for example, accounts receivable, monies that people owe to you on short term. And we like to consider that as liquid as well. Why? Within 30 to 90 days, you're going to get that money without necessarily losing much in value. In fact, the concept of liquidity is the degree to which you can convert an asset into cash quickly and without losing much in value. I mean, for current assets, we say assets that can be converted within a year. Yeah. But within items among current assets, liquidity changes. In fact, we list assets on balance sheet from increasing liquidity to decreasing liquidity. So you start with cash, then short-term investments. These are typically investments into liquid bonds, maybe short, small stock trades and stuff like that. Then accounts receivable, then inventory. For most firms, for certain firms, inventory could be more liquid than accounts receivable. Think about Walmart. But for certain firms, inventory is not very liquid. Think about Tesla. And it's not that easy to move that inventory. One of the ratios we look at, I mean, in the old days, we also looked at cash ratio. This is basically cash and cash-like to current liabilities. Only very short-term creditors would be interested in that. If you're expecting your money within, less than a month, that's probably more important to you. For example, let's look at Walmart. Let's actually calculate their current ratio, total current assets divided by Total current liabilities. How it turns out, Walmart is also below one. Let's look at the same number from, oh, I don't have the balance sheet for Kroger, but you could have looked it up. Again, Walmart doesn't care. Even if you don't want to do deals like that from banks, you can always get relatively liquid assets and make them liquid. Have you guys heard something called asset-backed securities? Let's say I have a lot of receivables and I normally expect to be paid. To make it easy on my clients, I tell them, oh, you can pay me in 6 months. But that needs to be financed. If I don't borrow from the banks, where am I going to get the money? What you do is you go to the bond market and you issue a short-term bond, which we call a commercial paper, and you say, I'm going to put these receivables as collateral. So if I don't pay you, you can take over these receivables and collect them from my clients. So you immediately have access to cash. And these are typically very liquid. In fact, money market funds love commercial papers because they yield a lot better than treasuries because you're taking corporate risk. But default risks on those short periods are very low. So money market funds actually are big customers of those. You have big international trade receivables. They're typically paid within 6 months. All you have to do is there's something called bankers' acceptances. They're commercial papers. Boom, you're there. So nowadays with financial engineering, it's not a problem. In fact, credit card companies or banks who lend using credit cards, they issue commercial papers using credit card receivables. Why would they use their own capital? In banking business, if you can make money by using other people's money, that's what the banking business is. And credit cards receivables are huge. That means in terms of assets, they're considered risky assets. So when Fed calculates things like capital adequacy ratios, it reduces them. They view you as risky. But why take that cost? Issue a commercial paper based on those receivables,